Hi, everybody. I'm Johnny Kolasinski, and I'm not a doctor. Jackson Vane is a doctor, but he's probably not your doctor. That means that this podcast is not medical advice. If you need medical advice or medical care, please contact a medical professional. And when you do, please tell them to subscribe to Hi, Everybody, a Bad Medicine podcast.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jackson Vane.
I'm Johnny Kolasinski. You might remember me from such podcasts as He's Dead Jim, Funeral Practices in the 23rd Century.
God.
And I went with that joke for a very particular reason. What are we going to be talking about today, Jackson?
So we're going to be talking about Star Trek Voyager, and specifically Season 1, Episode 4, called Phage.
Yeah, I'm a huge Star Trek fan. I do actually have another Star Trek podcast called The Disco Trek. I've been a Trek fan since before Voyager even started.
Wasn't your podcast the one where William Shatner got really mad about and blocked you guys on Twitter?
He blocked us on Twitter, but he was mad at someone else.
Sure.
So it's someone else with the same podcast name. So yeah, that was a fun little Shatner incident that has happened.
But this one has no Shatner in it.
Yes, this is a Shatner-free episode. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Star Trek Voyager, this is an episode, like Jackson said, it takes place very early on. The premise of the show is that it's a ship that's lost all the way across the galaxy. Half the crew's gone. It's a blended crew with some essentially rebels. And their doctor is dead, so they replace it with a hologram that's only supposed to be activated in emergencies.
Can I say the hardest working hologram doctor in the galaxy?
By far.
He has no nurses. He has no ancillary staff. He has no one to do mental health or social work kind of situations. He's doing it all on his own, and he got sassiness built into his programming too.
Yeah.
That is the sassiest doctor I've ever talked to or seen, or not talked to, but seen on television. And that's seeing House and stuff like that too. He's pretty damn sassy.
Yeah, so accurate.
Yeah. And if you guys were following us on social media, you probably would have seen I wrote a lot of notes on this one because there were so many things about this episode that really got to me.
Yeah.
Do you want to set up the episode, why we're doing this particular
The premise of the episode is that Neelix's lungs got stolen. Mm-hmm. And so they have to create replacement lungs until they can find his original lungs.
Yeah, but not just stolen. They were transported out of his body. And I kind of find it weird that he was gasping. Because how is he gasping if he has no lungs? Mm-hmm. He's just sitting there and there's nothing to generate that vacuum force for him to actually start gasping.
Right.
And it's a really, you would think, I don't know a lot about alien physiology, but know.
The xenobiologist couldn't make it this week.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, this is a bad medicine podcast for humans and not for, alien races. But the lungs and the heart are very intimately connected. And it's really hard to make one organ viable without the other one. They're so intimately connected that you need the blood to pump to the lungs, not only just to get oxygenated, but also to give life for the lungs to function. But in turn, the lungs oxygenate the blood that keeps the heart functioning. Mm-hmm. So those two things really need to connect. And I think the big concern, too, is when he was transported back to the sickbay, they said he was going into a coma. Mm-hmm. How do you go... The coma is really more a metabolic issue, but also neurologic issue. You when you think of a coma, you think of someone who's just lying there, almost vegetative and kind of breathing in very low pace, not really responsive or anything like that. It's really hard to slip into a coma if you have no lungs. You're pretty much going to slip into dead.
Yeah.
And I think that was the weird kind of statement. I had no idea what they were trying to go towards, but they could have easily just had him just drop down, and everyone's like, what the heck's going on? Scan him and go, oh crap, his lungs.
You remember
are gone.
lungs?
Yeah.
They're not there no more.
The lungs are gone. So the plumbing was all affected. So there was no way he was going to get the oxygen or whatever gas he needed to survive to help keep him alive.
Now, would there be a similar scenario to what we talked about when we talked about Star Wars, where you've got, in Star Wars, we talked about when you have your arm amputated, that blood's got to go somewhere.
Yeah. So I would assume that his entire chest cavity would fill up with his version of blood. Mm-hmm. So he might be spitting up blood. I think that would be one thing that you would notice too, is that he would be just pouring out fluid from his mouth or his nose or something like that too, and you would just see him struggling a lot more, and he'd just drop and turn pale. I don't know what he had a lot of makeup on. I don't know what a pale version of him would be, but that would be it.
So once again, going with the running theme of Hollywood needs more blood.
Yes. I mean, it's so sterile. There was not enough blood. It could have been so much gorier and so much more dramatic with just seeing that. But again, this was on TV, what, in the
95.
95? I don't think America was ready for that much gore on primetime
on
television.
UPN.
Oh, yeah, I forgot it was on UPN, too, yeah. There was no way the parts of America that did get UPN
both cities, both Detroit and Chicago.
Hey, I mean, it was in L.A. Oh, I know it wasn't in Ohio.
I got it. I watched it on the Detroit station. There was a Detroit UPN station that I was able to get in Toledo.
That's so far away.
No, it's actually closer than Columbus, or it's only like 45 minutes.
I am so bad at geography. I will wholeheartedly admit that I'm really bad with geography.
That's why I have somebody else on my bad geography podcast.
Yeah, that's another time on that one. That will be the one that you got to set up and plug for the next episode. But the other thing that was kind of interesting too was they were talking about how its cellular toxicity level started growing really high too, where it was going 60%, 70%.
It got all the way up to 95%.
Yeah. I mean,
that's a lot of toxicity.
What the heck is that? What is causing the cellular toxicity that they're describing? I mean, we do check something similar to that tells us if your body's going to like an anaerobic state, which we check something called a blood gas, and it tells me if you're acidotic or not. And usually the longer you've been acidotic, where your body is deprived of oxygen, the less likely you are to survive. And we do actually do that on really sick patients that come in. We'll check a blood gas. That comes back in about a minute or two. Think of it like a tricorder kind of thing. It's like a handheld device. We get like a drop or two of blood, put it into a cartridge, and then we process it right there and get it.
But it's not instantaneous.
It's relative. That's pretty fast. Like, it's faster than sending it to the lab, waiting 15, 20 minutes. This one takes like 1 to 2 minutes max, and you have a lot of the information you need to see how sick this patient is. Like if we had a patient that had a cardiac arrest out in the public, and then it took a long time for them to come back or come to the hospital, getting CPR for a long time, and we noticed that they are significantly acidotic, where their pH level, instead of being normal around 7.4, is below 7 and in the 6s, we know that their chances of surviving are very, very low. You can reverse it if you can oxygenate them and help them kind of reboot their system back from an anaerobic or an oxygen deprived state to an oxygen utilizing state. You can actually try to reverse it, but you don't know what other damage it's done to other organs. So if they were talking about cellular toxicity level, that could be one thing that at least we can correlate to present day quote unquote medicine in this situation. So yeah, like that was definitely something we check. We definitely don't check it in percentages though.
Yeah, what's because 100% is good, bad. Like there is stable.
Well, I would assume if you had 100% cellular toxicity, you're dead.
Right, yeah, but where would they draw that line of what 100% means?
I mean,
it's all toxins, no cells.
All toxins. Yeah, and I think the big thing is you can't be 100% poisoned and you're dead. You're probably dead at like 50% poisoned or 60% poisoned. You can't be, if you're 100% septic, you're dead. You're also probably going to be dead if you're 75% septic too. Like their chances of survival, you might not die right away, but you're probably not going to live for like another day or two. So I think that's a very interesting way to describe how sick that patient was, but not a great way of doing it.
The only, I'm the layman on the podcast, obviously. Sure. The only thing I can think of where they do describe things in that percentage is burns. Yes,
we definitely do describe the extent of injury through percentages for burns. We always talk about like we can use the palm of the patient's hand as 1% and kind of estimate that way. There's also other formulas that we do too. I'm blanking right now. I'm like post-call and I'm like a fuzzy brain mess right now, but definitely using hands can actually tell you how much % burns you have, and the higher level it is, or more specifically where it is, can actually affect how you live.
But once again, 100% doesn't mean dead. 100% means
well, if you were 100% burned, you're
dead.
You're Anakin Skywalker in the Revenge of the Sith.
Yeah,
you're charcoal.
But you would have been just as dead at 80.
Correct. You might be alive for a second, but you're not going to be alive for that much longer. And I think that's a big thing. And then the kind of the hologram doctor, I don't know what his name is.
He doesn't have a name. He's
Really?
the doctor.
He's the doctor, the hologram doctor.
Yeah, his name is the doctor.
Well, that's good to know.
Or the Emergency Medical Holographic Program, the EMH.
It's close to what I do.
Yeah.
Except I'm real and not a hologram.
As far as we know.
Let's not go on that part. But he starts him on something called a blood gas infuser, just to kind of get him oxygenated and try to save his life. And the crazy part is we do kind of have something like that in real life, and we call it ECMO. And ECMO stands for extracorporeal membrane oxygenation. And we actually do use that in situations where patients have recent cardiac arrest or an in-hospital cardiac arrest that we can potentially essentially take the blood and bypass the heart and the lungs. So the lungs act to outside of the body, and we put large bore needles in and catheters into their big veins or vessels, and then oxygenate their blood outside of their body and then pump it back in, and taking out the CO2 at the same time. And that has actually been proven to increase more survivability in patients like that too. There was actually cases where they do that in the EMS setting. Like if you were able to call an ambulance really quickly and it was an advanced care ambulance, like a high-level paramedic or a critical care transport physician, or if there's an EMS physician. So there are such things as doctors that drive around and respond to seriously ill patients out in the community. They can start them on ECMO on the scene, and that actually does increase their survivability.
Okay.
But it's crazy because the way you set it up is you have to anticoagulate them, which means you're giving them heparin so that they don't clot their blood. So that makes it really concerning, because if they have a cut anywhere on their body,
right,
or anything like that, they'll bleed out.
Yeah.
That has higher risk for stroke too. And I think in this situation, if you had a patient who is missing their lungs, you got to be really careful where you're putting those cannulas, because if that's going down one of the paths that needs to go to his lungs, you basically are encouraging this patient to bleed out. But we have used that before. I actually had a patient, one of the first patients that my unit used it on. And they said if I messed up and I killed that kid, they were going to go home and kill me. The kid made it. Cutest kid ever. Last I heard, he was doing fantastic, but I remember we had to give him a haircut while he was just getting off of the ECMO, and he was more mad about the haircut than having big old bandages and catheters pulled out of his chest.
That's because you didn't have the barber from Face Off there to give the haircut.
Yes, because it would have looked a lot better. But the hardest part was actually we had to put a trash bag around his neck so that the hair would not get into his tracheostomy tube or into his wounds.
Because you didn't have one of the normal barbershop drapes.
No.
Because you are an emergency room.
This was actually in the ICU.
Oh, this was in the ICU.
Yeah. So that was the part that he was the most upset about, was cutting his hair and not the massive tubes that were previously in his body. So that was the craziest part about that. Yeah. And how long do you think a patient like this can be on ECMO? Because I know that was a big question Neelix asked. Like, how long do I need to lie in this thing and get holographic lungs placed into my body?
I would think that it'd be relatively... It could be a long term, but it's ideally not.
Yeah, like, you want to guess how many days?
I would guess there's not a limit.
There is actually a limit.
Okay.
So only about 25 to 30 days can you be on ECMO.
Okay.
The reason why is the longer you have a central dwelling catheter, the higher risk of infection you have.
Okay.
The longer your blood is anticoagulated, the higher risk you have of a bleed inside of your brain, which will kill you. Mm-hmm. So, and then any kind of nicks or care that you take, like you're turning the patient, because you don't want a patient lying on their back the whole time because they get bed sores, right? bed sores equals bleeding equals death.
Yeah.
So you can't really you can keep a patient alive for a while. You just can't keep them on it forever.
And not because of the ECMO itself, but because of everything you need to do to support the ECMO.
Yeah. So the risks of putting a patient on ECMO is really, really severe. This is one of those last resort situations. You're doing a Hail Mary pass going, okay, the lungs and the heart need a little bit of a break and need some time to recover. Like, let's say you had a really bad pneumonia that actually ate out your entire lungs, or you were vaping recently and you got popcorn lung. That's actually one of the treatments of it, because your lungs need some time to recover. So we need to do that and try to give your body, take off as much metabolic load, take off all the stuff that you would burn calories for, and use that to recover instead of using it to keep you alive.
But you wouldn't recommend ECMO as, the hot cleanse of the autumn.
Oh, God, no. Yeah. To remove the toxins.
Yeah.
I mean, the only toxin ECMO will remove is
carbon dioxide.
Yeah. The rest of it, you got so much more stuff to do. And if you're on ECMO, you're not awake. You are pretty much completely out.
And even if you were, you wouldn't be able to speak.
You could still, well, physiologically, you can technically speak.
Okay.
Because your lungs still are
They're still
moving.
there.
Yeah, they're still moving.
Uh-huh.
But you're going to have a breathing tube.
Okay.
So it's really hard to speak with the breathing tube, because the breathing tube goes through your vocal cords, and your vocal cords are what make sound.
Right.
So you'll speak and your vocal cords will just keep slamming on the tube, and you're not going to be able to talk. It's that gagging feeling. You're not going to be able to really talk really well. I mean, there are some situations where they do awake intubation.
This is the first time I've been skeeved out on our show, by the way.
What, with the tube?
Yeah, with the idea of
cords?
talking with a feeding tube or breathing tube.
Yeah. If you need a breathing tube, you're in pretty bad shape.
Yeah.
But we try to knock you out and paralyze you so that you're not aware of what's going on. And the paralyzing, not because we're mean and we don't want you fighting the tube. It's because if I don't paralyze you, your vocal cords are very, still moving. Mm-hmm. I need them to be paralyzed so that they stay open. Otherwise, if you're awake and I touch them, they slam shut, and then we have a new problem. So that's the reason why you get paralyzed and sedated at the same time. Usually you get sedated first, and then you get paralyzed, because the last thing we want to do is paralyze you
and have you still be awake and aware.
Have you know what's going on. That sounds like a nightmare. It's like when you wake up from sleep and you can't move, like sleep paralysis.
Yep.
That sounds like...
Add surgery.
But add surgery, or bright lights around you with a lot of strangers staring at you and saying stuff, and you can't respond.
Or in the case of Hollywood medicine, one stranger around you, because there's only one doctor at any given point in time in the world.
Or hologram.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm surprised how much he could do by himself with no one else around him. I get it. He's a hologram. He's smarter than all of us. He's got a computer program and all that stuff. But he can't pick up stuff.
Yeah, he can.
He could?
Yeah, he's
oh, that's right. He slapped someone.
Yeah, he is physically present. They use force field technology.
That's so crazy. I don't get it. But yeah. But then I think if you watch the episode, they put Neelix in almost like a iron lung situation. Mm-hmm. Why is he not thrashing? Right? Like,
you mean immediately?
Yeah, I mean, if you're lying in a coffin, essentially with your neck out, natural instinct is, I need to get the hell out of here. And you're going to be thrashing and kicking a lot more. Mm-hmm. I get it. He has holographic lungs, and
they talked about how they paralyzed him.
How did they paralyze him just from the neck down?
Magic Star Trek.
But I would think if they paralyzed him, he wouldn't be breathing or anything like that. And maybe they were using the iron lung of yore when kids had polio, and were doing that to expand their lungs. That's why people get intubated now, so you don't have to use an iron lung anymore. I don't understand that part. It just blows my mind. I would just be so mad about that. Just being stuck in there, and then awake paralyzation sounds like a horrible nightmare.
You would say that the better move would be to keep him completely sedated during all of this.
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, you have lungs that are not tested, right? Mm-hmm. They're holographic lungs. They just did this on a whim, thinking that might work. Wouldn't you want to remove as many variables as possible to make sure that this patient lives, right? Mm-hmm. Why do you want an extra variable of a potentially aggressive patient or a combative patient?
Or, I mean, we saw him freak out and start hyperventilating.
Yeah. Hypoventilating without lungs. Oh, no. Yeah,
he had the lungs by that point in time.
Man, how do those holograms keep up with his hypoventilation? Or hyperventilation? Yeah. That is insane. But I think going back to him being agitated, if I had a patient that was that agitated, I would be placing him in restraints. Mm-hmm. And they really didn't really put him in restraints. It was just that iron coffin lung kind of thing. And we actually do this a lot in the emergency department, is that we do have to place patients in restraints, unfortunately. And it's usually involving some kind of danger to themselves or dangers to others. And it's not a decision that we take very lightly. Mm-hmm. Anytime we put anyone in restraints, we have to do a face-to-face kind of encounter, look at him and go, we need to put you in restraints. I can't just have a nurse that comes up to me and goes, that patient assaulted me. I want you to put him in restraints. Mm-hmm. I can't put in an order like that. I actually have to go and see what's going on and then write a note every hour that patient is in restraints. And then during that time, we can't keep a patient in lockdown like that for that long, because the more they thrash around, they actually break down muscle tissue. And the other big concern is, we had one kid that was thrashing around so hard, he was able to tip the gurney on its side and almost flipped it completely over. So I do like that the doctor in the show, kind of tying this all together, did give him a sedative, because there's no point in making someone anxious and scared and not control it with some kind of medication to calm him down. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't have gone for the neck like they did in...
They always go for the neck.
They always go for the neck, and I don't know what they're aiming at. It's just, here's a gun, I'm going to put it at the neck and go, psst. And I drew on my neck gesturing with my pen. But we never go for the neck. We always go for a big muscle, usually the leg, because it's meaty. And it gives it time for it to dilute or dissolve, or not dissolve, but distribute throughout the entire body. So that was a big safety issue that I was surprised he didn't address on that part. But any other things that you can think of? There was one other kind of light thing that about this whole iron lung thing that was kind of funny to me, though.
Okay.
How he got really bored and judgy about the entire medical bay. Mm-hmm. He's staring at the ceiling saying it's really boring. We actually put stuff on the ceiling in children's hospitals for kids to look at while they're lying on their back.
My dentist does the same thing. And so every time I go into the dentist, I see the same quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. Because I always go into the same bay.
It helps a lot. Because it gives them something to focus on and stare at instead of just white holy ceiling or anything like that. We have kites or underground scenery. When you get an MRI, I don't know if you've ever had one before.
Not since I was 11 or 12 years old.
But now they have TVs that kids can watch TVs a little bit while they're getting
I think I was in high school, I think, so it would have been right around the time this episode aired, like 95, 97, somewhere in there. Mm-hmm. But I was able to listen to music.
Yeah.
But that was about it.
That's really helpful. Kids these days, it's like you need very active stimulation, so music doesn't really cut it. So sometimes actually watching a little bit of shows or whatever, or having things that they can follow along does help a lot. It just has to be not magnetized or, you know.
Yes, it's got to be a completely non-magnetic TV. Mm-hmm. So later in the episode, we learn that the reason that they're doing this is because... Are you ready to move on to that part?
Oh, yeah.
Is because there's a alien race called the Vidians that have this... Essentially, would it be a degenerative disease? It was kind of like...
It doesn't really sound like a degenerative disease. It just sounds like a highly aggressive disease.
It's a highly aggressive disease that eats their organs, and their medical technology cannot cure it, but has progressed to the point where they can adapt alien organs to use for transplant.
Yeah, lung transplant and organ transplant seems so easy to do in the future now. Mm-hmm. Like, cross species, not a problem. Host versus graft rejection, easy. They did something called, and I wrote it down, they can alter their, quote, immunogenicity, so there's no rejection, and they can do cross species. I don't know what that word means.
Well, immuno obviously comes from immune, and genicity obviously comes from gin.
Thank you. Yes, obviously it's gin, because you got to drink a lot of gin to do this procedure.
Yeah.
And I get what they're trying to go at with. It's a good plot driving point so that his 2-year-old girlfriend can actually end up giving him a lung.
That's an entirely different problematic thing.
Yeah.
They live to 8.
They live to 8?
Yeah.
So
but he's, normal.
So if they live to 8, then she's technically, 25, I guess?
Yeah.
If you estimate normal life.
Yeah, except for he lives, human timeline.
Still, you took the lungs from a 2-year-old. There's so many ethical problems with that. I want a baby lung. Baby lungs will make me stronger. And not only that, you left the baby with 1 lung.
1 lung.
How is she going to do her job as a medical assistant? The smartest baby in the world, or the galaxy. How is she going to do her job now? Because now
her new job.
Yeah. I mean, eventually she might have increased... the lung might get stronger and she might be able to oxygenate more efficiently. But man, those first several years are going to be rough. And she does not have several years.
No. No,
she's going to be at a midlife crisis before she actually gets back to a reasonably function or a
reasonable lung function.
Yeah.
Lung function.
Yeah. So that was a jerk move by Neelix, taking his 2-year-old.
Neelix spoilers for Star Trek Voyager. She leaves the show at the end of the 3rd season.
Because she died of old age?
Because she gets crazy psychic powers.
God.
But she, once she's gone, and once they break up earlier in the season, because Neelix is kind of a possessive jerk to his 2-year-old girlfriend, he becomes a much better character.
Can I also say, I don't know how much more possessive you can be. He possesses one of her lungs.
Yeah.
You can't be more possessive than that. He owns a lung.
Yeah.
That's, super commitment there.
I thought that's a great 6-month anniversary present.
I thought he was in the friend zone earlier in the episode.
No, that was Tom Paris in the friend zone.
Oh, God.
Because he was being creepily possessive from within his iron lung.
So terrible. So terrible. I'm trying to think if there was anything else. I wrote down so many notes on this episode, and I'm trying to think, can you control his lung function? Yeah, through ventilation. And they could have done that with the iron lung kind of situation, but initially he was so sick, I don't know why they were waiting so long. He really should have been dead instantaneously. Not just from lack of oxygen.
But shock.
But shock, yeah. Hemorrhaging more than anything. So hypovolemic shock would have been the biggest thing I think he would have died from. Or hemorrhagic shock, I mean. So, yeah. I don't think I was this frustrated so quickly. No, see, here's the thing. Crank was its own special beast. This is only an hour, and I wrote as many notes as the entire movie of Crank. And granted, a lot of it was just thinking of how can I apply this to real life. Mm-hmm. And ECMO is probably the closest thing to real life of what we have here, but there was no way they would have survived that long.
Was ECMO something that was around in the 90s?
You know what? I'm not 100% sure on that. I gotta look that up. But I know when I was a resident, it was starting to be used a lot more.
Okay.
I know a lot of it was used mainly for children initially because what I learned is the older you are and you're on ECMO, the less likely you are to survive. So my ECMO cases usually were on very young children. But the one time I did put ECMO on a teenager, they didn't make it because they were just that ill. And I think as the technology has progressed, but also the education has progressed, where people are recognizing when to initiate it, they're able to initiate sooner, so it's actually increasing long-term survivability. Kids are usually resilient. I always tell families, kids are bouncy. Mm-hmm. They usually do pretty well and can take a lot of... I don't want to say punishment, but I guess that would be what I would say. But they're able to bounce back from more serious illnesses better than an adult can for a lot of other things too. So they're not just this fragile, delicate thing. Kids are usually pretty resilient. So I guess baby girlfriend probably would have done better than Neelix in general. Yeah.
So asking the question I always ask. This is a tough one because it's the whole episode.
It is the whole
episode. And it's Star Trek science is hand-wavy science a lot of the time.
It is, but there's also, like, some things that are kind of realistic about it, too. Like, it's crazy because Star Trek science does crazily drive some real-life science, too. Mm-hmm. And I think we talked about this at one of our Comic-Con panel, was that it does drive what we do. The tricorder was one of the things that they used to assess heart rate and pulse ox and just basic illness and stuff like that. And now people walk around with Apple Watches that tell them their heart rate. Mm-hmm. And you can have a handheld oxygen saturation monitor. And those things are so readily available now. So to kind of immediately dismiss Star Trek as, hand-wavy science, yeah, there's a lot of that kind of stuff. But there are some things that were good about it. Like, I would say the cellular toxicity level, though explained in a very weird way, does kind of apply to what we do in real life. Mm-hmm. We definitely do make sure that your cells aren't so toxic that you're not going to live afterward. The blood gas infuser, mm-hmm. which is essentially ECMO, we definitely use that in very critical situations. The plumbing might not have been right in this episode.
It wouldn't go on your forehead.
It would not go on your forehead. Though that did bring up one really kind of crazy thing. We do use similar electrodes on kids' brains or patients' brains while they're intubated to make sure that there's still some kind of brain activity going mm-hmm. on. It's kind of like a rudimentary EEG, just to make sure it still works.
So there is something that they use kind of as their equivalent of the defibrillator, which is a cortical stimulator, which is like a defibrillator, but it goes on your brain or goes on your forehead.
Nope.
Nope. So that's kind of
the closest thing to a cortical stimulator is electroshock therapy.
Right. That's kind of what they're doing.
That's another episode.
Yeah.
Definitely. But we don't do that. We just monitor their brains while they're intubated just to make sure they're still alive. Because it kind of goes against ethics to keep someone alive if their brain's not alive.
Right.
So that would be the last kind of straw. So if we were doing brain death tests and trying to figure out if we should keep this patient alive or not, that would be the thing I'd be worried about.
Okay. And if... So, obviously, the getting by on one lung is feasible. Cause,
it's feasible. I mean, people do that all the time.
Yeah, my grandpa did for a while. My grandpa ran into a burning building with one lung to show the firemen where the fire was.
Oh, I thought he was running in to stop the fire. Never mind.
No, he was running into because the firemen couldn't find the fire, and he was a better firefighter
How
than
do
them.
you not find the fire? It's just...
It was under a sink. They didn't look.
Oh, okay, fine. I thought it was like a burning house, and they're like, the firemen just showed, like, where's the fire? It's right there. I don't see the fire. That would be the saddest fire department ever. I hope it's a volunteer department.
I think it was a volunteer department, but yeah, he ran in. They had their full gear. He ran in with bathrobe and slippers. And one lung at 70-something.
Okay, so not at 2 years old.
That's fine. Not at 2 years old.
Okay, acceptable. But yeah, you can definitely live on one lung. Your exercise capacity is just significantly diminished. And I think baby girlfriend would have not functioned really well as a medical assistant if she wasn't getting oxygen to her brain and doing her job really well.
There's that.
Yeah. So, yeah. There's good stuff and bad stuff. I think there was some explanations that helped. There were some good explanations of what they were doing. It's just not the typical terms that we would use in current day medicine instead of Star Trek Future Medicine.
Yeah. This is, I think, the oldest thing we've covered so far.
Face Off is close.
These are all written before Wikipedia.
Yeah.
And so, for an uneducated writer...
But to be fair, not older than the old medical consultant.
That's true.
You can always ask a doctor to make sure if it's looking real or not. And I get it, there's creative licensing and creative freedom, trying to make it seem more interesting. And using bigger words makes it sound really interesting, and the lay people will latch better onto it. But I think... the excuse of Wikipedia wasn't available isn't the greatest. Plus, also anyone can edit Wikipedia.
That's true.
I'll just go mess with someone's Wikipedia page and see what happens on that part.
If you want to ask this doctor, to consult on your show. It's hieverybodypodcast@gmail.com.
Yes, or you can find us on social media at Hi Everybody MD. We're on all of them. If you have ideas for future episodes, do not be afraid to post on there.
Yeah.
We'll definitely take those into consideration, and always looking for more ideas to make fun of and critique and have a good time talking about.
Absolutely. We'll probably be talking more about Star Trek because I love Star Trek. But there's other things that you want to talk about. Just shoot us a note. Let us know.
Yep. I do not know much about Star Trek, so I'm all relying on Johnny on this one. So I'm just going to be the neutral party watching and then just furiously writing notes and probably putting up on online.
So many notes
on this one. I'm just going to keep a running book of all the stuff I've written down and see what happens at the end of the first season. Yep.
All right. So with that, anything final to add?
I got nothing. My brain is mush right now.
All right. Yeah. Jackson recorded this right after an overnight too, so
I feel great.
So thanks, folks, for listening. We'll be back next Tuesday with more Hi Everybody, a Bad Medicine podcast.
Thank you so much.